Live from the KC Property Guys and KC Pier studio in beautiful Kansas City. Home to over 200 fountains and more barbecue restaurants per capita than anywhere in the nation. It's the Kansas City Real Estate Industry Leaders Show, a show about industry leaders from the local Kansas City metro market for Kansas City real estate related professionals and enthusiasts like you. And now, here's your hosts, Eric and Lucas Scheele.
How's it going, everybody? It's Lucas Scheele, and welcome back to the Kansas City Real Estate Industry Leaders Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Eric Scheele. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing awesome. And then also, we have our Director of Operations for KC Pier, Brian Dufour, in here today. Brian, how are you doing?
So far, so good. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right today. And today, we're going to be talking about just the overall piering for the side of KC Pier and what we kind of do there and how to get in touch. So, Eric, you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So, our podcast, which is relatively young, right, is just getting started, and it's focused under KC Property Guys. But with KC Property Guys, as you can see on the back wall there, we have multiple companies and multiple entities, and we're using KC Property Guys in the studio to really develop three platforms. One is the one that we've been doing together, which is KC Property Guys and looking at the cash real estate investment world of Kansas City and focusing on those. And we have a series of channels and episodes that'll specifically focus on those episodes. Mm-hmm. And then we also have some great real estate, our Kansas City real estate industry leaders that come into the studio as guests, and we talk to them throughout the whole city, right? And that's another channel, and those episodes are getting started, and those are a lot of fun, talking to those guys. And then the third one that we're starting today is focusing on KC Pier and the foundation world, specifically focused in the Kansas City area. And so we have a series of episodes that will actually focus on KC Pier and more specifically, or KC Pier specifically, but more generally, the Kansas City foundation industry and the foundation repair industry. And so I think it's really appropriate that this week we got our project manager and also one of our sales guys here and industry experts within the foundation realm in Kansas City with Brian Dufour. So it's with you, Brian. I think it's great that you're in the studio as our first episode because you have a wealth of experience. And you're going to be able to give us a really good, and our viewers and listeners and readers, a really good overview of not only drawing from your experience and working with some different companies throughout the past of kind of the industry of Kansas City repair and foundation repair in general, specifically even from a national perspective maybe, but definitely from a Kansas City perspective. And then obviously we're going to tie it back into how we work with things at KC Pier. So I'm excited about that. And I just want to make sure that we're kind of clear that this is our first episode of probably close to 10, specifically that we're going to be doing for KC Pier. And
we got a few planned out. Yeah,
absolutely. And the foundation world. So I'm kind of ready to kick that off. So maybe, Brian, before we even get started, if you could just kind of tell everybody and tell us about kind of your background. And then we're going to kick in and talk about specifically Kansas City.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in the foundation business a little over 15 years now. Started as a laborer, digging holes, moving dirt. Started from the bottom, worked there for roughly 6-7 years. I worked my way up into a foreman position, managing crews, going through crews. During that process, with the first company I started with, they started shipping me around the nation, showing me different basements, different soils, how they react to each structure that it's done with.
Right.
And during that process is where the sales came in as well. The one thing that a straight salesman can't do that I can is I know exactly how it's going to look. I know from the bottom up how it is. When we come in as experience from the labor aspect, not just trying to sell you something.
Right. So for clarity's sake, a typical sales guy doesn't necessarily see the end of the job. He sees the front of the job and he knows it by theory.
Correct.
You're saying, hey man, I've dug the holes. I've been there when I shook the customer's hand and they walked me through the job completion, and I've also sold the front end. So you have that kind of industry advantage.
Correct.
to know the full process.
Absolutely. I don't have a sales pitch. I have the experience and the knowledge of the answers and the questions that you ask. So it kind of changes a little bit when I have the conversations. During that process, I also, after 4 or 5 years of that, I became a project manager, oversee the crews, made sure we had the right material. And during that process, that's where my knowledge really started to change, because I was given the opportunity to train and also look at the waterproofing side of it,
Right.
and make the changes to what I thought better fit the Midwest to fix the basements.
Now, I don't know if you remember this. So also for our readers, listeners, and viewers, KC Property Guys was born for the housing industry. And we used to outsource, KC Property Guys used to outsource our foundation work. And back in 2016, I got tired of outsourcing it and not necessarily having it done right, and also waiting on somebody else's schedule and paying a retail price versus, economies of scale. So as KC Property Guys grew, one of the big ticket items I wanted to take care of very quickly was foundation. So we brought that in-house. And when I brought that in-house, and now I don't even know if you remember this, but we were out in the middle of, we were north of Kearney in the
Yeah, it was
country.
in between Kearney and Liberty, if I
You
remember
remember the
correctly.
house?
Yep, I remember the house
It was
completely.
fractured. The floor was fractured. And Brian wasn't working for KC Pier because guess what? KC Pier didn't exist
Yeah.
at that time, right? We were bringing them in as a competitor, and also kind of assist some of the transition work that KC Property Guys was doing as we were staging to become a foundation company. And you were there. You were at
Yep.
that job, and we walked it. We actually didn't end up with the house. They ended up just selling straight MLS. I hope they got that foundation fixed because it was rocked.
Yeah.
Man, it was fractured and in rough shape. But that was my first exposure to you, even before KC Pier was born. And you had
absolutely.
the experience as a project manager then, and then of course we brought you on as soon as the opportunity became available, and it's been, we haven't looked back since. And so that part of it is fantastic. Now, you mentioned your experience of comparing, soils and stratas around the nation. So what makes Kansas City kind of different than, say, other places that you've seen and experienced in the industry?
Well, here in the Midwest, you have it's red clay. It's very expansive. So what happens is, with all foundations, is you either have too much water or you don't have enough. So what we have here is usually right around 60% of the time, the soils are stable and they don't adjust much. But when we go through, as of this year, a massive rainfall we have.
50-year floods,
Absolutely.
50-year rains this year, right? We've hit a record, actually.
Absolutely, yes.
48-year high. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what have we been doing for
We've
most
been
of the year?
strictly waterproofing. We've been chasing water and taking care of
Right.
flooded basements.
Yeah.
The difference with it here is once it expands, it fully expands, and then it turns into a waterfall above. And as you get that, if you don't have positive grade, you start having massive issues around the house.
So as the clay you're saying is acting as a sponge, right?
Absolutely.
Absorbing that water. Once that water gets absorbed, what's the sponge do, man? It just leaks it out.
It just
So
continues
now,
leaks.
where's the grade on the house? Is it positive going away from the house? Or if it's neutral or negative, man, once that sponge just starts leaking, guess where it has to go?
To the basement.
To the basement,
Absolutely.
right?
It
Is it
finds a
finished or is it not finished? Those are the calls that we're getting.
Yeah,
You're absolutely
absolutely.
right. Okay, now what happens when, let's say we go into 110-degree summer, what's going to happen to that clay at that point?
Usually what happens is you get huge cracks throughout your yard. That's the first start of everything drying out. Mm-hmm. And then typically the cracks shrink and shrink. They get bigger, actually, and you start getting gaps in between the foundation and the soil. Well, over the time, the heat finds its way down there. The soil shrinks so much that the foundation actually chases the soil.
So as the water leaves, the clay begins to contract back, right?
Absolutely.
It relieves the pressure from the walls of the house, so now you don't have the soil and the strata and the clay supporting your house in assistance with the walls. You just basically have the walls.
Correct.
And weaker foundations that have a multi-ton house sitting on top of it is going to succumb to some pressures that it's just not used to having.
Absolutely.
And so that's where the KC Pier, that's where the pier side of KC Pier kicks in, right? And
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. The podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your likes, shares, and support. Now, back to the show.
kicks in, right? And Lucas can speak onto this because he does a lot of the marketing, obviously, and he goes on site with Brian and Eric and takes pictures. And in fact, just today, you guys were looking at holes of some pier work that we were doing earlier.
Yep,
right?
some pier work out in the next end. We got a really nice video coming up. Going to be on our blog page as well as on some of the pillar pages for Kansas City Pier as well. So,
oh, nice. On the settling side.
Yeah, it should be fun.
So
good video.
So you have waterproofing when it's expanded. You have settling when it's contracted. And what else do we see in Kansas, and how is it different than maybe, real quick, how is it different than maybe some of the things that you've seen around the nation?
Well, the one positive we have here is during our weather change, we have enough time to catch it before it gets bad. When you go to the southern markets and you go to markets like that, they don't have basements. So
it's all sand, huh?
It's all sand and it's soil, but your footing is only a foot and a half under the ground. So up here, when it takes 3 weeks or a month for the heat index to affect your home, down there's only a week.
Yeah.
It don't take no time at all.
Well, the soil's not even cold enough. You hear our frozen soils, you're saying, which we have 3 footers.
Correct.
It takes a long time for that frozen soil to ultimately thaw.
Well, yes.
Right?
That aspect, but you also have a 8-foot basement.
Right.
So the heat, as the soil shrinks, it takes longer to get to the bottom of that 8-foot mark than it does on a slab on grade where it only takes a foot.
Right.
So down there in the southern markets, Oklahoma, Arkansas, when we go down there, it's strictly piering. You really don't get into the waterproofing market down there. Makes sense. Usually what they do down there is they typically pier the whole house and they'll lift it out of the floodplain. So they don't ever have that issue anymore. Up here, fortunately, we can't do that because of the way the structures are built.
Right.
But we also don't have to do it because we have enough time to adjust to the weather.
You're talking to a house guy, and I know, and we all know, everybody wants a basement in Kansas City. I mean, that's just that's the expanded living space. So there's a definite drop in price points when you go on slab or crawl space versus a basement. So your points make perfect sense. It's going to take longer to thaw. You're 8 to 10 foot down. Everybody wants that basement, so it's in demand, and so we have to adjust here locally for that
Correct.
Demand.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right. So when it comes to the fixes in between, I mean, what are the types of fixes that we're seeing? This clay is expanding and contracting. You've talked about some waterproofing. We've talked about some piering, but what else are some typical types of fixes that we see here in Kansas City based on these soils?
On the soils, you can do as much as a French drain system up top to help reduce the water that builds up next to it. That's very inexpensive to waiting for the problem to occur.
Right.
This year, we've had a lot of interior drains. It's not been so much of bowing walls because the waters came in so rapidly that the walls have not bowed. The soil's not been heavy enough, fast enough.
That's an interesting point. So the water, so if the water is just sitting there and constantly putting pressure on the wall, that's where we actually see walls begin to concave or roll or crack due to the constant pressure. But when it's basically like a flash flood underground, you don't see it.
Absolutely.
That water just finds a way and gets itself in.
Absolutely.
And the pressure is relieved because the water's already there.
Correct. And with the way that they're built, we have floating slabs, so they're not tied into the foundation.
Right.
And they're not designed to because of our expansive soils.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a massive flood and you have massive water at such a rapid pace, if you have positive drainage outside, the water's not necessarily staying next to the house. It just has nowhere else to go.
Right.
So it's going to find the easiest path. And since you have floating slabs, what's called the cold joint is where the water decides it wants to come out of, and that's where you get all your flooding in your basement.
Yeah, and for you typical homeowners, they don't know anything about the slabs. And so what Brian's talking about, that cold joint, where that basement floor meets that vertical wall.
Correct.
There's no, a lot of people think that's one piece, and it's definitely not
Correct.
piece. It's
No.
two pieces. And there's no glue, there's no mortar, there's no way to connect those.
There's no
It's a cold
rebar,
joint.
there's no nothing. It's designed to move because of our pressure and because of our soils.
And water loves to find those leaks and
Absolutely.
cracks and least resistant pieces.
Absolutely.
And that's
So-
where it comes in.
Yep, that's 9 times out of 10 when you have a flash flood, that's where your water is going to come in at. And that's where a big portion of where everything we've been doing this year has been that.
Makes perfect sense. And so you've been, Lucas, you've been on the marketing side and taking pictures. I know when we're sending them to homes, it's like another interior drain, another interior drain, another interior drain. You know, we're seeing a lot of those because of the water table.
Correct.
You know, it's just up there. It's finding its way through that cold joint. So there's two ways to capture that water. I guess we should talk about that too, just generally speaking. And you can speak on this better than I can, but you know, water's coming from one place. It's coming from the exterior of the home.
Correct.
You either address the issue on the exterior of the home, like you said, cheaply with a French drain, but when the issue is a little bit more extensive, then we can look at that interior drain as the cheaper alternative than maybe excavating the whole outside wall and
Correct.
taking care of the problem itself.
Correct.
Right? Or you know, so you can address it on the outside and take care of the issue itself, where the water is coming from, or you can at least, at a minimum, which tends to be less expensive, capture it on the inside. And
Correct.
that's where that interior drain and sump pump system would ultimately come into play.
Yes. When we go out and we assess a home, we assess everything. So if you have positive drainage, you have gutters that has positive slope away from the house, you have all this that you've done to maintain on the outside, and you're still getting water, 9 times out of 10, it's coming from underneath. And when you have an unfinished basement, it's very easy to see. But
Right.
when it's finished, and you have all that assessed outside, the interior drain, and then what's also called wall sheeting, which is a mold resistant that we put up on the wall,
Right.
that runs down into the drain. That is a cheaper fix that's also very effective when you go to finish your basement. Now, if we get there and you have negative drains, you have poor gutters and things like that, the assessment's going to be a little more different, because if you already have the negative drains and the rains that we've had over the years has already put that pressure on it, the rains we're getting now is just extensifying it. So when you hit it, usually you're going to have actual foundation issues, not just water. So when you have a finished basement, that's where it gets a little more extensive before we can come up with a good repair with taking down the walls and actually seeing it correctly and giving you
Makes sense.
that option. So when we come out and take a look at it, we have to look at the outside first before we look at the inside.
Makes perfect sense. So we've talked a ton about water because that's been the theme of the year. It's been water. But what are some of the things that obviously it's easy for owners. I guess my point is it's easy for owners to say, hey man, I got a water problem because you got water in your basement. You know, it's simple. But what are some other signs of some of the other issues that you see pretty commonly, especially in the Kansas City area, that people ultimately has to deal with? But how do they know so they even need to contact somebody like KC Pier in the first place?
Well, actually, it's pretty easy on both ends. And usually people don't really look into it until they have people over. It's for the holidays, and you can't shut your bathroom door for them to go to the restroom in privacy. So when you can't,
Doors are sticking.
correct. So when your doors won't shut, you start having cracks coming off of doors or windows and things like that. A lot of times they really don't look at it
Yep.
as an issue at the time, because if there's no water, you don't have a problem. But if you can't shut that door, it's okay. I can live with it for the moment.
Right.
But when you have issues like that, usually the time they call us is when the front door won't lock and they're not safe anymore, or the privacy issue. But those are the one things that you can look at, because doors just don't stick by themselves. Cracks just don't appear
Right.
by themselves. It might not be a massive issue yet, But if you catch it in time, you'll be able to take care of a lot of the problems that would occur in the future as well. But 9 times out of 10, when you have a settlement problem, piering, it's doors and cracks. That is going to be 95% of what you see.
Makes sense. So doors are sticking, windows are acting funny, and you see cracks in the corners of say the door corners. And
correct. You got door jams. You got there's also a common one across the ceiling, usually where your hallway meets.
Yep.
That one's very, very common, and no one really focuses on it because it's not affecting anything at the moment. But that's a very common one that, hey, something's starting to move.
Makes perfect sense. So you get water, you see cracks, doors are sticking, windows are sticking, and you just kind of want to know, get somebody to take a look at it. How can someone at least start for KC Pier? How's the whole process start?
Actually, the best way to do it would be to go on our website. We have a form on there that you can fill out. You send in. Once it's sent in, the office will call you, and we can set up an appointment that best fits your needs.
Yep.
It's never too early. It's never too late. We can get in there. We can go over it. We can come out, or you can just call and we can ask questions. It don't take anything to ask a couple questions and make sure that it's the right way.
Perfect. Yep. So kcpier.com.
Yep. We also have the KC Pier app that's available on the iTunes Store, the Apple Store, as well as Google Play.
There is an app
that
specifically we have it for realtors, but end users can access it too. Anybody can access it too, and it's a great little app because all you do is just simply snap pictures. It comes directly to us on the sales side to KC Pier, and then we get back to people within 24 hours. Great tool for realtors.
Absolutely.
Out there that we pushed all our realtor offices, but we've had end users even find it and exercise it as well.
It's just
absolutely.
the KC Pier app.
Yep.
That's all it is.
KC Pier, or give us a call or fill out the form on the website, and you'll go out or one of the sales consultants will go out there or at least consult through it. And then typically there's a drawing or something that comes with the assessment.
Correct. Once we get there, we'll go over everything, and then we'll make a drawing of the house. And with every house, you have options. There's never one option to fix your home. There's always multiple options, and we'll give you all of them to best fit your needs. Whether it's your forever home or it's your 5-year home. There's always a plan to fix it to best fit what you need to correct what you have going on.
Buyers, sellers looking to sell a house, looking to buy a house, realtors looking to sell a house, investors looking to sell a house, buy a house, rehab a house. There's options.
Absolutely. There's always more than one.
A, B's, and C's, different price points, different warranties. You can throw the Cadillac at it.
Yep.
Or you can just get the job done, put a Band-Aid on it, buy yourself time until you have, say, money at a later period.
Correct.
Do a multi-phase job, do part of it one time, wait till the next season, see if it's really moving or affecting, and maybe address another part of it
yes,
another
absolutely.
time. There's always options. The problem is, that, and we talk about this a lot on the KC Pier side, is the foundation issues. They just simply don't repair themselves.
No, they don't.
Once they start,
they don't stop unless it's corrected by a professional.
Yeah.
The faster you catch it, the more options you have. If you wait too long, your options tend to come a little limited. So
and probably more expensive.
Correct. Absolutely. So if you see something, don't just call us. There's no reason to hesitate about a free conversation.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
All right.
Great.
Let's wrap it up. Appreciate you coming in.
No problem.
We're going to have you back. It depends on the subject area. We're going to kind of rotate. Like I said, we have like 10 chapters and episodes specifically for Kansas City foundations and the problems. More specifically, and Brian touched upon a lot of them. We're just going to go in more depth with a lot of those problems to give you some insight of and ways to fix and some of the approaches to actually fix those, so you can take some common sense approaches to make best choices for you as a homeowner or a realtor or investor, or just simply someone who is looking to protect their investment. So we're going to dive into a lot of those pieces much more in depth as time goes on. So I appreciate you coming in, and we look forward to having you back.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate being here.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys, and we'll catch you on the next episode. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Kansas City Real Estate Industry Leaders Show. Please support all things local to Kansas City. And hey, be sure to subscribe and share our podcast on Facebook and LinkedIn. This has been a KC Property Guys production. KCPropertyGuys.com.